I'm Matt at Nexus Baseball, and this is episode 24 of the Tommy John Epidemic. This series is a YouTube read of content from the book Plague of the Gods, an outsider's perspective on baseball's Tommy John epidemic, which is available now on Amazon. I decided to put this content on YouTube to make the material as accessible as possible. The series examines the science behind the most superhuman action the human body can produce, accelerating a baseball up to 100 miles per hour. Chris O'Leary's analysis on elbow height and timing, while not based on scientific studies, is well argued, with Eric Cressey among others not teaching this position due to his rationales. That said, Cressey argues that due to survivor bias in the major leagues, and the vast number of variables at play, a single factor such as elbow positioning is unlikely to be the defining element. Timing itself can still be a key component of the injury puzzle, but is clearly dependent on a wider variety of mechanical factors rather than just one keystone. The issue of timing and arm stress has been a known commodity, with Tom House and others discussing the subject as early as the 1980s. The initial focus was on the timing differences imparted between the longer wind-up motion, used with no runners on base, and the abbreviated stretch position, utilized to thwart potential base stealers. By shortening the wind-up, it was initially thought the pitcher was sacrificing momentum and therefore velocity for a quicker time to the plate. This was later found not to be the case, with pitchers able to throw just as hard from the stretch as the wind-up. The focus shifted to the potential alterations in the pitcher's mechanics the position required, and if additional arm stress was created. This was a key examination, as for the average starting pitcher, half to two-thirds or more of a pitcher's pitches would come from the stretch position. Indeed, almost all relief pitchers throw exclusively from some version of the stretch. As a result, the stretch position requires a great deal of focus to maintain the complex sequence of events of the pitching delivery over a much shorter time span. If a pitcher performs a component too early or too late, injury is more likely. The stretch itself has been blamed for some of these timing issues, with more and more pitchers simplifying their mechanics by removing elements such as the pump and leg kick to speed up the delivery and make it more consistent. A new trend is for starting pitchers to pitch from the stretch exclusively, utilized now by Stephen Strasburg and others. This is an unlikely cause of UCL damage in and of itself, as pitchers have been throwing from the stretch long before the peak of the epidemic in 2012, and the adoption of some starters always pitching from the stretch also came after that time. It may, however, accentuate an existing problem by forcing the pitcher to execute the delivery more quickly and without a measured cadence. Although there have been several theories regarding the mechanical cause of arm stress and therefore damage, the greatest consensus is that regardless of the originating factors, the damage is caused by valgus stress of the elbow. The term valgus stress originates from the valgus stress test, used to determine instability and weakness in the inner portion of the upper arm. This valgus stress is pressure on the elbow where the UCL is located, as the elbow struggles to maintain its alignment between the upper and lower arms. In the baseball pitch, this occurs from the forces of the upper arm internally rotating with great force, while the forearm is laid back into external rotation. The greater this force is on the elbow, the greater the strain placed on the UCL ligament, and the greater chance of damage. A device called the Modus sleeve has been created by a third-party company to attempt to analyze valgus stress on the elbow and debuted in 2014. The sleeve goes over the pitcher's elbow and uses sensors and physics equations to determine the torque on the elbow during the pitcher's delivery. Specifically, it uses the Newtonian equation that force equals mass times acceleration squared. The total elbow load is therefore equal, according to biomechanical engineer Dr. James Buffy, to the mass of the forearm and hand multiplied by its rotational acceleration. Although this provides useful physics data about elbow loading, Dr. Buffy is skeptical about the utility of the Modus sleeve and how it applies specifically to the loading of the UCL. There have been several studies looking at the role of the forearm in stabilizing the elbow that have come to differing conclusions. The difficulty with approaches such as Modus is that they do not factor in the load on the more than 10 individual muscles that cross the elbow and alleviate that force. Knowing what muscles should take what load and to what extent is perhaps the biggest hurdle in determining how to spare the UCL the forces of elbow valgus stress. Dr. Buffy is at the forefront of this research, focusing on the role of the forearm in protecting the UCL. His 2014 academic article determined that the load on the UCL can range from catastrophic to non-existent, depending on the contributions from the muscles and bones. He is currently attempting to use an anatomical-based approach with advanced methods to assess the load on the UCL. Dr. Christopher Ahmad takes the approach that the flexor pronator mass on the palm side of the forearm, when utilized, can stabilize the UCL against valgus stress. Dr. Job focused instead on the flexor carpi ulnaris as the forearm muscle best suited to stabilize the elbow in the pitching motion. Both believe, however, that the forearm muscles have a strong role to play in relieving the stress on the elbow created by the pitch. Chris O'Leary believes that the twisting of the forearm to have the ball face second base at arm cocking prevents the forearm from pronating fully through the delivery, deactivating the forearm muscles that protect the UCL and therefore causes injury. He calls this form the Tommy John twist. Many trainers, including Dan Blewett, have put this initial knowledge into practice, advocating training the forearm muscles, in particular the flexor pronator mass, to both increase ball speed using the forearm as well as protect the UCL. If the most recent science cannot deduce the role of the muscles of the forearm and how to calculate the effective valgus stress on the UCL specifically, it is at least attempting to treat it directly. As damage to the UCL is detected, there are several new techniques to help it heal. The first is the use of a technique called platelet-rich plasma treatment, or PRP for short. This technique involves the collection of the patient's blood, which is then spun in a centrifuge to extract the platelets, which are tasked primarily with healing damaged tissue. They are then injected into the UCL area. The goal is to speed the body's natural healing process, as the UCL, being a ligament, does not have a great deal of blood flow as would a muscle. Similarly, technologies like the ARP wave and MarkPro are electrical stimulation devices. Think a highly specialized Dr. Hose that stimulate contraction and therefore blood flow in the damaged area. They have the goal of speeding healing by increasing blood flow as well. A device called a Normatec pressure recovery device can also be utilized to provide greater and reduced pressures to the elbow to stimulate circulation. The electrical stimulation, pressure recovery, and to a lesser extent PRP can be utilized not just after traumatic injury, but to potentially prevent UCL failure by helping the body repair itself before the damage becomes irreversible. All the potential causes and preventions for UCL damage that have been discussed make up different pieces of the same puzzle. That puzzle seems quite convoluted due to the great deal of disagreement between the parties involved if, or to what extent, one factor is more relevant than another. The problem is again in providing scientific basis for such a complex and variable motion. Sports scientists have been working on the issue of UCL damage for over 20 years, with a great deal of research being completed within the last 10. During this time, there has been precious little in terms of breakthroughs or consensus, with each study raising more questions than it answers. In the meantime, most teams and coaches try to play it safe and limit their pitchers to prevent injury, hoping that caution can make up for a lack of understanding. All the while, there are hundreds or thousands of pitchers that might be ticking time bombs and they don't even know it. Join me for episode 25 next week. Remember, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. Your support makes this work possible. Also, if you want to jump ahead, please consider picking up the book on Amazon from the link in the description below. See you next week.